Welcome to the Business Growth Masterclass, where business growth is made simple. I'm your host, Albert Gillespie.
And I'm your co-host, Kellen Ketchersid. Join us as we bring you stories from business leaders so you can learn from their wins, their losses, and everything in between.
Today's guest is a close friend, a debt broker and owner at Blackacre Commercial, managing partner of his title company, and managing partner at his law firm, and recently governor appointee of the great state of Texas.
Wow.
Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Carl Pankratz.
Thank you, Albert. That is quite the opener.
You know that you're like the Dos Equis, man. You know, most interesting man. I never know what I'm gonna get. I'm usually gonna try some kind of food I've never had before, and here's some story from a foreign land that I have no idea about. But welcome to the podcast, sir.
Yeah, excited to be here and excited to meet you, Keller. So
yeah, it's great to have you on. We've been looking forward to it. So just to get us started, I'm curious to hear, from that laundry list of things that are in your title, what do you spend your most time on?
So we own Blackacre Commercial. So it is a debt and equity shop. We do debt nationwide. And that's really the focus of what I do. We do all kinds of lending types, and we'll get into that later in this interview. But we, focus on agency. So for apartment owners, there's Fannie Mae, there's Freddie Mac, there's HUD. For everybody else, including apartment owners, there's life companies, there's CMBS, there's banks, there's similar groups to banks, there's debt funds. So we kind of manage that entire universe. Our specialty is HUD. Given my background, I'm a former deputy mayor pro tem. I was on a group that built an apartment portfolio to 7,200 units. I worked for a direct lender to Fannie, Freddie, HUD, so I have that direct experience. And I worked for a nationwide group that also added in the brokerage component. So you have that, and then my background, I was a general counsel at a title company. I started my career after law school in the abstract and exam part of a title company. So kind of given all these tools, it's really made HUD fun because HUD has a lending type in which they'll do ground up construction. They'll also do refinance. They typically take 5 to 7 months, depending on the type. And it's always, there's always stuff that goes wrong. But, given that background, I'm uniquely suited on that particular type to really navigate issues as well as everything else. But there's that. But, we have a great title company that focuses on commercial real estate. That's really the focus. And, the law firm is really picked up doing all things real estate.
Wow. There's a lot in what you just said. We're going to need some time to unpack that.
He is a real estate expert. And so for our listeners, can you briefly describe what does a debt broker do?
So depending on a business owner's strategy, we find them a debt product to make them successful. So if you are a real estate owner that maybe the real estate your office is in is your major asset, well, then we can maybe find you a loan product that is 100 basis points cheaper than if you went to your local bank. So we basically, if the real estate is your core business, then we can hopefully help you get an interest rate that makes the cash in your pocket flow a little easier. If real estate's not your core component, as far as, you're not an owner occupied, real estate is, I guess if real estate, is more of an investment tool, then, obviously you might have partners that require distributions or hope for distributions in this market, or you might have ideas on maybe rehab you want, so you need dollars for that. We canvass the nation and I guess now internationally, we canvass hundreds of groups to try to find the right fit for you. So whether you're in Lubbock, you'd be surprised on, groups across the country that would lend money in Lubbock that you wouldn't have access to if you were somebody that was just maybe getting started, or, the debt market wasn't your every day. I wake up every day looking at the 10-year treasury. I wake up every day calling new lenders, building new relationships. I spend a substantial amount of money traveling to them directly, whether it's on the East Coast, West Coast, internationally. So I wake up every day trying to figure out how can I find debt products that help my clients succeed. So I bring something that you wouldn't have if this isn't your day to day.
Yeah, that it's always the normal, everyday guy doesn't really know how to describe what you do. And for us, you are an invaluable partner. As we are acquiring commercial real estate, I think of countless transactions that we've worked together, um, that people on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and in London that have so many different debt products that all of them have their place depending on what the strategy is in that asset, in that real asset. Are you looking to hold it long term? Are you an owner occupied business owner? And given different attributes like that, there might be something better than your local regional bank that makes that debt service payment lower. Maybe some of those are non-recourse, and that can roll off your balance sheet. And there's just different strategies in play. But having a relationship with all of those various lenders around the world is not something a normal business owner does. And not, I wouldn't even know how to approach that. And so that's one invaluable piece, that you are a connector of connectors. And I am always blown away by the people all around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already blown away by all the things that you guys are talking about that are going over my head. And I think I'm going to have to be the layman in the room because I'm the one who knows the least about debt products and things like this. So for those listeners that are more in the category of not very knowledgeable like me, can you give us some examples of what some of those debt products might be and who the ideal dancing partner is for those types of strategies as far as like what would make sense for a borrower?
Yeah, so a lot of times your strategy is dictated on two things: loan amount, meaning what's the size of the loan that you want, because that's going to dictate, are you maybe are there groups that are maybe kind of tapped out at, we'll just say $2.9 million. So quickly we can eliminate them. So kind of figuring out what is your loan amount, and then the second big question is leverage. How much leverage do you need? Really in today's environment, leverage really dictates in some cases pricing.
And so what does leverage mean?
So yeah, of course. So there's a metric that we use quite a bit called loan to value. So loan to value is basically the formula of, you take, say you have a $10 million asset, you have a loan that's 8 million. So that'd be an 80% loan to value loan. So that's a kind of the top end in a lot of cases of the loan that you can expect to have. And so in the apartment world, apartments are subsidized by the U.S. government with programs under, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and HUD. So those are low prices based on the fact the U.S. government is trying to promote affordability. So that's why they've really entered into the apartment world. But in a lot of cases, if you're dealing with a business owner and it's their office, different lending groups will give you, in a lot of cases, preferred terms the lower that loan to value is. So for instance, a deal that might be 50% loan to value avails yourself up to maybe non-recourse financing. It might open you up to more interest only if maybe it's entirely interest only. A lot of cases you can get a significant discount on your interest rate. And today, maybe you're at 6.2 versus you'd be at 6.7 or 6.5 if you maybe did 80% or 75% LTV. So a lot of times it can help you with pricing. Now, there's a lot of people whose strategies are built on, I want as much debt as possible. And so in those cases, then I'll help you meet that as well. And so the bridge programs are a lot of times the most common ways to kind of push leverage. So a bridge program is defined in a lot of ways, but one of the ways I defined it is it's typically a 3-year term with 2 1-year extensions. In most cases, it's floating, and it's going to be priced on SOFR, the secured overnight financing rate. And so on those programs specifically, those allow a lot of times higher leverage. Some firms will require you to buy a rate cap to try to protect your upside risk if interest rates go up. But you have 3 years basically to implement your program of fixing up an office, maybe putting in new ACs in an industrial building, or doing whatever you want. And then you can, get out of that maybe at a 1% exit fee of the loan amount and then get into better terms as far as a perm. So that's a fixed rate, or that's a floating rate debt fund. So that's a strategy if you're going to implement a major rehab.
Okay.
If you're not going to implement a major rehab, then we're going to start to kind of price out what is the best perm product. If you're kind of where you're going to be, that's stabilized, at 90%, or your business is fully up and running, then it just kind of comes down into what matters to you. Do you want a 5-year term, 7-year term, 10-year term? Do you want a 25-year amortization? Do you want a 30-year amortization? Are you trying to go, as much interest only as possible? All those now become part of the strategy again to how do you become successful? And life companies are, a lot of people don't know that life companies play a really big piece of this component. And you got to think, if you're a life company, you take in premiums, as part of your main job. So people are paying these life company premiums to you. And so you don't want that to just sit there. You want to invest those so you can continue to grow those so that you stay viable for the foreseeable future. So they dedicate a specific amount of premiums they receive into real estate. And so a lot of those are really focused on the typical life company likes lower leveraged loans, but they typically offer great pricing. A lot of times they can get you a 10-year fixed, a 15-year fixed, a 20-year fixed. They can offer really interesting terms. Their downside is a lot of times in their investment, they're going to want to have an idea when they originate that loan of what kind of yield they can expect. So that requires a prepayment penalty. And so if you're interested in a long-term loan and you're okay with a prepayment penalty, then a life company might be a pretty good fit. And they have different programs, but that's kind of the general profile of a life company. But, I could go on and on about, CMBS. CMBS is a tool. It's a commercial mortgage-backed security loan. It's a commercial real estate type of loan that you can use for all commercial real estate products. But it's 30-year amortization. It can go up to 75% LTV. And typically that can help if you want the non-recourse, but a lot of times, you have to be prepared for the attorney fees are a little higher. So that's something you got to understand. And the docs a lot of times will, typically include a 9.5-year prepayment penalty if you're doing, for instance, a 10-year loan. So you have to be okay with that as well. And then sometimes, you got to make sure when you do a loan like that your documents reflect your operational ability to succeed. So a lot of times those are pre-printed documents that you really have to, spend a lot of time protecting yourself on. So I know that's a lot. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. Let me jump in real quick. And so a lot of these are different strategies depending on what is the role of your real estate in your business. If you are a commercial real estate business, you need all the flavors of the rainbow. If you are a business owner, it depends on what are you doing with that building. If you're buying an older building that needs some renovation, maybe that's a bridge product. And so, like the name describes, it's a short bridge to get you from A to B. And so you're buying a older, distressed building, you're going to renovate it, make it nicer, you're increasing the value of it, and that bridge gets you there. Then at the end of that, then you refinance into perm or permanent financing that you want to keep in place for a longer term.
Mm-hmm.
And given that strategy, how old are you? How long do you want to stay in that location? Really dictates what you pursue. And so Bing's talking about interest only. And so for a period, you can negotiate just paying interest on the loan. And so your debt service payment is lower. Or the longer term, lower leverage, lower rate, you're going to be locked into that for a longer period of time, depending on the product. And they are selling that to someone else. It's a securitized loan.
Mm-hmm.
They're selling that to another investment group that has return requirements. And so holding that amount of time is really important to them. And if you sell it earlier, there's penalties to make sure that they get the return that they're telling their investors. And so there's so many different products there, and I don't want to get bogged down in all of that, but basically there's so much nuance to that, and there's so many different strategies that I don't think the average business owner is exposed to. And I wanted to bring Carl on just because he's an expert in that and has done so much and knows so many people that's something that business owners need an expert on their team.
Yeah.
They need someone whenever they approach a new problem. Maybe it's, a large capital piece of equipment. Maybe it's a new manufacturing facility. Whatever it may be, having a expert on your team that can help bring you options, debt options, to help execute your business plan is an important partner to have.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, these conversations are intimidating because there's all these, terms and things flying around that you obviously understand really deeply. But for somebody who's just entering into the game for the first time, maybe they want to just buy the real estate that their business is located on, or they want to start investing in real estate. Um, it's kind of get your head spinning quickly.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say that's the role of the debt broker,
Right.
is to come in and hold your hand, put his arm around you, and like explain, hey, you've got 5 options in front of you. And this is what this is what that means for you.
And advantages and disadvantages of each one. It makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And really, our group is better set because of the law firm and the title company component. So it's kind of you have one person who can help engage all the way to closing versus we're having to introduce multiple parties that you might not know. Or, I'm a notary. So maybe in some cases, I'll actually be the notary that signs a document. So it's something that, to your point, this is sometimes a very kind of intimidating process, So as a business owner, some of the things you need to think about if you're getting ready for a refinance or if you're getting ready to purchase, a couple of things is number one, if liquidity and net worth are going to be my first 2 questions for you. Making sure that you have that cash available, because a lot of times, when you're doing if it's your office, we can look at how has your business performed, and that's going to help. But also, you personally is going to be a big piece of the pie as well. So, thinking about personal financial statement, 3 years of tax returns, including all your K1. So if you have a lot of different businesses, just kind of start preparing that we're going to need to see tax returns from all corresponding K1s. What's been really picked up lately is, a focus on liquidity means I need to see maybe the last 2 months of checking accounts, so I'm going to want to verify up front that liquidity. And so that's a big piece of it. So, PFS, 3 years of income statements, liquidity proof, all that kind of is kind of the main things to kind of start putting together. And then kind of thinking about, do you want to hold the business in an entity or do you want to hold it, under your name? And a lot of times there's a lot of business owners that, and talk to a tax advisor, but that'll maybe have a business under an LLC and maybe they're paying rent to that LLC, or, there's a lot of ways you can kind of put things together, but, kind of thinking about the entity and then preparing all the documents that, we're going to need, that'll help expedite it. And so, there's a lot of businesses that, really you've finally made that decision to buy, and it's, it's my job to hopefully get you a product that helps make you comfortable with that.
Very cool.
Yeah. And that's part of the financial aspect in our coaching is we want to get in the weeds and help business owners understand what is a PFS? What is a personal financial statement? Why do you need to keep that up? Why do you need to know what each line item means? And it's for things like this. You would be surprised, having something organized with an articulate story, how much better loan terms you can get just because they're more comfortable with you. And that's huge. Okay. How did you get into this? I know you've done this a long time. How did you get started?
Yeah. So, graduated from SME Law School, and first job out, obviously 2008 happens. And so a lot of real estate firms weren't hiring real estate attorneys. A lot of times they were kind of moving real estate attorneys to the bankruptcy section because there was just so much business in bankruptcy at that point, and unfortunately. And so I was my favorite story of all time. I decided that I was back in Lubbock and I was kind of talking, with my dad, and it was a Wednesday night basketball game and it was Texas Tech versus Nebraska. And me and my dad loved them. We picked some seats that maybe weren't ours. Please don't judge me. I hope that's not a moral call. Please, I've changed a lot since then. I don't know. But my dad was like, let's sit in these seats. And I was like, yes, sir. So we're sitting there, and a kind gentleman approaches us and says, "Hey, are those your seats?" And we were like, "Maybe." They're like, "No, they're mine, but just scoot over, you're fine." And so about the third quarter, I'm like, "Man, you are a great guy. Like, what do you do for a living?" And he goes, "Well, I was a former U.S. congressman and state senator. Now I'm the chancellor of tech." It was Ken
What?
Hance. And it was like, I mean, I didn't know who Ken Hance was. I just thought like, man, we're just going back and forth the first two quarters. And like, man, we just really hit it off. And that started a incredible lifelong friendship where, I don't think people will truly ever understand the power of Ken Hance. Ken Hance is somebody that has incredible success in every area. Whether it's wealth, whether it's real estate, whether it's lobbying, 100 different areas. But he does so much for people that he doesn't talk about. And that's the power of wealth. It's he literally, there's so many people who have a Ken Hance story, and who, like me and my dad at that point, we don't come from a wealthy family. I think my dad had paint on his shirt from working hard all day, and he treated us like we were the king of England, and that was something where it's like, that's pretty special. But at any rate,
Yeah.
at that, as we kind of talked about, well, I'm heading back to Dallas. And he goes, "How serious are you?" And I go, "Well, I'm pretty serious." And pretty much the next day is basically like, "All right, well, here's two opportunities." And one of them was at a title company. And so I had an oil and gas offer at that time. And I talked to Kent, and Kent said, "Well, Carl, real estate's where you want to be. Go to real estate." So I was like, "Yes, sir." You kind of rely on the best advice you have. And so I ended up going down that road. And coming out of law school, I thought I was going to be greeted with, "Here's your Rolex, here's your corner office, and here's your $500,000 salary." I was greeted with a cubicle, a Casio watch, and a very timid salary. But as much as that's kind of a tough thing, my job at that title company, which I hated at the time in a lot of days, but ended up being a blessing, was fixing problems. So it was a big title company. And a lot of times when there were hiccups, it landed on my desk. And so I don't know how to do this, and that was constantly like, I've never seen this before. I've never seen this before. Well, that's one of those things where it's like, wow, like, okay. It was training for something I didn't know I was being trained for. And so got that, and then did really well. And then somebody approaches me, and at any rate, so it was going really well. And I ended up writing an article while I was there, and got noticed by kind of the industry of the title insurance. And so, that was going really well. But what changed my direction was I knew that I wanted to do something else. And so I was volunteering with the Rockwall County Boys and Girls Club. I had no intention of being on the board, but I ran into somebody that did whiskey tasting. And so I go, well, heck, man, I want to, throw a fundraiser to help the Boys and Girls Club, and you have, access to free alcohol. Let's join forces. So we threw this great little whiskey tasting fundraiser for the Boys and Girls Club. And one of the people there was a guy named Will Shattuck, whose dad was Bill Shattuck. And so, Will had a great time and ended up telling his dad about me. His dad, pursued me and hired me. And pretty much I ended up being pretty much the general counsel of a 300-person company, which is, a very big difference. And so I remember that first year and a half, maybe 2 years, I was single, so I could do this, but I would, I was getting bombarded with questions. I was, dealing with lawsuits, dealing with everything. And so I'd stay at the office till 10 o'clock every night because I had so much to learn. And I didn't come from big law, so I didn't have a reference point. I had to learn it myself. And it was hard, it was hard doing that consistently. But again, it was just one of those things that kind of builds you, And so I was like, man, I don't know this, but I'm going to be the best darn general counsel. And so that evolved, and then it evolved into building my book of business. And so I was able to kind of get the legal stuff. And then I was like, no, I want to go back into commercial close. So I started building my own book of business of clients to close. And so then that's what really kind of built my name. I started a networking group called Black Acre 48, which is in the Tower Club, and started getting 50, 75, 150 people at these meetings. And I was the MC. So people got to know me. And so then now I'm established in Dallas, and then, started, kind of seeing success in a lot of those areas with, you start to see different awards and things come your way, which was just mind blowing for me and where I came from. Then, ended up meeting, and golly, this is going a long time. So
This story
is a long time. So anyway, so doing really well there, but, one of my meetings, or one of my Blackacre big panel discussion groups, was a finance panel, and we had a guy named Vic Clark there. And Vic Clark, obviously well known in Dallas, well known in commercial real estate. He didn't really touch base there, but we had met after that at a gala, and he had just lost his wife. And didn't know Vic, but I could tell it was somebody hurting. And so I go, Vic, I am so sorry for what you've been through. I'm so sorry you lost your wife. Let's go find another one. And so I grabbed him and I'd introduced him to everybody at that gala, just because, it was just like, he's a great guy. And I just wanted, and so it lifted him up, and he never forgot that. And, a couple weeks later, he's like, Carl, I want you to come work for me. And that was definitely not in any way my intention. I don't think I would have built that strategy to go work for Vic Clark. Right. But, wow, it was such a blessing. And so out of that, he had a group there was a direct lender for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and HUD. So really that apartment jump. And it was, man, do you leave your book of business behind to go into a completely different career? It's ancillary, but a lot of difference. And then plus, like, I didn't have a lot of background in Excel and some of those at that time. So I know I was going to have to ramp up again, but it was the best decision I ever made, changed my life kind of decision, and so that was, call it 2013 ish. And went to work for Vic, and that first year, like everything else, it was just kind of like, I am going to learn these models, and as I literally would pay some of the interns in the asset management side just to, like, can I buy you lunch and just teach me this little part of the model and teach me this little part of the model. I had no, like, I didn't care what people thought about me. All I cared was, I just need to get this information. And after about that 18-month mark, the success just started coming, and, we ended up being very successful in that office. And so, I'll stop there. And then that led to some other things, but I see Albert is ready for a question, and I've been talking for the last 45 minutes.
No. I think you can hear it in his story that Carl is a relationship guy. And I read this week. I think it's in the book, 5 Types of Wealth, but it talks about, you don't pursue relationships for what you get out of it. Like you pursue real, authentic relationships because you're genuinely interested in people, and you genuinely care about people. And you do that long enough, it's a better life, and good things come your way. Yeah. And that's like, kind of the whimsical, naive, happy-go-lucky Carl. He's like genuinely interested in people, and we'll start up conversation with anybody, whether we're in downtown Houston and he's in the middle, we're trying to work out, and he's in the men's locker room hamming and egging it up with anyone who will talk to him. But anyway.
Well, it makes me think you've taken a page out of Kent Hance's book and put it into your own life. And that's what I was thinking when you were telling that story, is you, even when you came in before we started the show today, you had that kind of feel about you too. And I also, as you were telling that story, some of the things I kept noticing were, what is that quote? I think it's attributed to Thomas Jefferson, or, I'm a big believer in luck, and I find the harder I work, the luckier I get. It seems like that's a lot of what's going on in your story too. It's like, yes, you're working hard, you're grinding up to, 10 o'clock at night, hours on end, day after day, but then you're also putting yourself in a position where, a good thing can happen, might meet the right person. And you're just being, like you were saying, Albert, just a relational guy, just a genuine, not looking with an agenda to get hired or anything, but then the door opens and you're there, you're the guy who's ready to walk through it when it opens. So I think there's a lot of lessons in that story that people who are listening can take away from it. And it's just cool to see how it's played out for you. And for everybody, it's going to look different, but showing up, working hard, and then being ready for an opportunity. You never know when it's going to come. You never know when you're going to sit next to Kent Hance, or was it Vic that you said is the guy you run into at the gala? So,
and another part of his story is he's willing to follow curiosity. He has this one thing that he knows, and he's built a knowledge, built expertise, built some clientele. But there's this next thing that he's genuinely curious about, and he takes that step. He walks through the door, and it leads to the next thing. And so where we left off on this is larger title company. And what was the next step after that?
So started off at one company, ended up moving to general counsel, moving into Fannie Freddie HUD Direct, and then we ended up moving to another company. The managing director of that, somebody that I played football with at SMU, and he had really kind of seen an incredible success, and so he brought me over, and that's where the brokerage started. It wasn't just Fannie Freddie HUD. That's where he got bank and CMBS and Life Company and everything else. Kind of built the equity side, all built there, and so. I was there, and it was an amazing education. And wow, we did so much while I was there. Closed the biggest transaction I'd been associated with at 160 million, and
Holy smokes.
that was a fun one. And then met an amazing woman named Kim Radiker Bays, and so she owns Exponential Property Group, and so. Went into the operations as head of or director of acquisitions, and went on the let's go see how many apartments we can buy, and that was fun as well. It was Bill Shattuck. I learned a lot about. He was an entrepreneur. He could do a lot with little information, and he built an empire. And I was right next to him throughout the entire journey, and I saw that, and that changed me. Vic Clark, the way he built and negotiated and worked with clients and got new clients. I learned from that. Kim Radiker Bays is another skill set of who I am because, as she built, there's a number of problems. And, when you're dealing with a management company of apartment, you're dealing with all stratas, all social economics. And so she was somebody that could really speak to anybody, which is exciting. She also was able to build a pool of hundreds of investors that invested in her. And, her philosophy was based on how many millionaires can I create? And literally that's what she focused on. She was an investor first, owner operator of apartments, and she did everything she could. And to understand, my last year there, I underwrote 100 apartments. We made bids on 3, and we only bought 1.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like that sometimes is what you have to do on the acquisition side. But then to kind of understand the management component in order to manage, understand a lot of things that go wrong. So that brings me back now as I'm so glad that was such a blessing in disguise. COVID happened and that kind of launched me to start the companies that I ended up starting. But it was like I was so blessed to work for everybody I've mentioned. And that's what, sometimes people ask me about jobs, it's like, go work for the best person you can learn from, and that's really what's created, me. And so now I can take all these. It's like when I talk to an apartment owner like Albert, I can say like, all right, well, going through these docs, like, have you thought about how this is going to affect your operating, have you, these are the expenses I'm kind of looking at, but, is this really the expenses that you can get? So, if you're not in real estate, that might not mean a lot to you. But what I'd say is that just all these experiences have allowed me to really kind of be a full-throated assistant to somebody that's trying to make these decisions.
Yeah. How much would you say just the diversity of your experience through all of that has helped you? Because I feel like a lot of people who have been in different types of work through their career are able to think in more creative and different ways. Do you find that to be true in your experience in the way that you work? Just the breadth of experience that you bring to the table helps you kind of understand, maybe have a different perspective than some of the other people in your industry?
No, 100%. I think the issue spotting, pretty quickly, it's like, what are potential issues that are going to affect this transaction somehow? And it's like that can, show itself in a lot of different ways. There's constant troubleshooting. I'm working on a transaction now where it's what's called a leasehold. So it's somebody that's getting a lease on some property, and the city that the property is based in, for instance, none of the leases have had legal descriptions, and so yet they want to close in 4 days. And so I had a surveyor who I might have to give a bottle of Johnny Blue to, but luckily he was able to do this in 3 days. But I could spot early on. It's like, okay, well, that's something we need to jump on now. I know you're really focused on the banking side of this, but like we got to get a stinking legal description first. And Or, there's, all kinds of other things, mechanics liens, for instance, sometimes there's mechanics liens you have to deal with. And so let's start that negotiation now and I'll lead it. I'll be the one that drafts the mechanics lien, the release of that lien. And then, I'll maybe negotiate with that vendor so that we can maybe pay them down and then we can move the transaction. So there's a lot of minutia that like you wouldn't see if you weren't a lawyer or you didn't have title company experience or you didn't have operational experience or you didn't have debt, equity experience. And so it really is kind of what makes you unique.
Yeah.
So my main, like I said, my main lending source a lot of times is I do most HUD transactions, and HUDs are such bears, but you got to know pretty quickly, like, hey, there's a lot of things that need to come together to be successful. So all that journey helps.
Yeah.
It always makes me think of that Drayton McLean story. Drayton McLean of like Baylor, Scott and White, and Baylor University, McLean Trucking. I think he owned the Astros at one point. Old ornery man. And before his dad would let him come work for him, he made him intern in 6 different industries all around the nation. And he gained that breadth of experience that when he came back and started working for his dad, they thought he was this savant, but really he was just stealing from all these other people that he learned from. And that's really what we all do.
Yeah.
We're there's not a lot of original thoughts. It's a lot of other people that have poured into you. And if you're willing enough to listen and willing enough to ask more questions and be genuinely interested in people, you learn a lot and you can help a lot more people.
Well, and as he was talking through that, I hear a lot of overlap with like even project management thinking, like I quickly in the process identifying, oh, that's the part that's going to slow us down. In other industries, they'd say, oh, that's the bottleneck, and how are we going to make sure that that's not going to keep us from getting to the finish line at the time that we need it to, or we need to. But you can't have that kind of broad perspective and see the whole playing field unless you've been in lots of different situations and career positions, even the most humble starting spot, at the title company or wherever it is. Sometimes those are the positions that later in your career are going to serve you in ways that you would have never imagined. So I just think it's cool. A lot of people out there are grinding and maybe in a job that's not very rewarding in this moment. Maybe down the road, it's going to turn into something good for you. So, yeah.
All right. Changing gears, you are pretty plugged into various political campaigns, and whether it's on the federal level or internationally or even locally, you're pretty plugged in there. Tell me about the governor appointmentship. I don't even know if that's the right word. You were appointed by the governor. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it means a lot to me because, as you get older, one of the worst things that happens as you get older is close family members pass. And my dad, unfortunately, it rocked my world. Ended up getting cancer, and it was he was already at stage 4 when we got it. And so, as we were going through that process, somebody who I love with all my heart and soul, state representative Angie Chinbutton, made it her purpose to really help me get through this. And we had some other senators on board from Dallas that jumped on and really, told the governor about me and just helped amplify my application. And it was pretty amazing before my dad passes for me to tell him, hey, Dad, your son who grew up in Woodrow, Texas, was just appointed by the governor of Texas to do this. And it meant the world to me. But it was a board that was focused on, right now in Texas, there's a lot of, you want to have as much land productive as possible. And so there's a lot of times where there's areas that nobody knows who lives there. And so the thought might be, okay, well, let's maybe pull some of these areas of land into a land bank. And, there's one, I guess Houston is the only city by statute that can actually have a land board development company in which you can kind of take these, they can develop it themselves, they can lend money on it, they can kind of get all these. And so the thought was, all right, well, maybe that'd be useful in El Paso or some of the other areas around the state. And so that was kind of what we were charged with. But, it meant a lot. And so, I think the lesson is there's a lot of times where, I went the political route myself. I was a deputy mayor pro tem of the city of Rowlett. So I was a 2-term city council person in Rowlett, Texas, about 35 minutes northeast of Dallas. And, that was an incredible learning exercise. And, I might know a lot about real estate, but pretty quickly I'm like, okay, so like, what are like lift stations and like how many manhole covers and like, there's like all these other things you don't think about. It's like quickly was like, I love now like green space. And I see the importance of green space, especially for a lot of people that might not have a lot of economic means. Green space is that place where you have, quinceañeras and birthday parties and where families come together. And you have a 2-year-old, like, what do you think and do? Well, you go to the park, so parks. And so I really got a love for park space and how important it was. And you kind of learn a lot of different things. And so, but I'd say all that just to say that there's a lot of people that maybe don't want to pursue public office. Well, appointments are an incredible way for you to still give back. And so the governor has an application. It allows you to apply to get appointed. And it's a process. They vet you, but it's a neat thing to do to give back to your state.
That is great. So how long, I take it that you've already served this appointment and it's completed now. So how long was that for?
It was about a year and a half.
Okay.
So it was, and everyone's different. There's some that are a lot longer. There's some that are project specific. So there are a lot of ways you can kind of do that. But, they have these at the federal government too. Right now, Trump is trying to fill appointments in a lot of different areas. And so they're really looking for people. There's somebody whose name I won't say that's based in Lubbock who just got appointed to a division in HUD. So, there's a lot of things where it's like, if you're ready to really make a jump, you could do this at the federal government level as well.
Wow, that's very cool.
What would you say, for our listeners, business owners, business leaders, what is the role of government and getting involved politically? What is that role in their business?
So when I was elected city council, we'll just say, I had no idea the ramifications, we'll say, on road policy. So we had a road policy that basically said that, okay, roads is 25, I forgot what the metric was, but we had a degree of wear and tear in which we would say, yes, we can fix it. If it's worse than 25, then we're going to put it into a bond election. So that's one thing. But if you're a business owner and that's your road, are you arguing saying, no, this road really doesn't need to wait until a bond election that might get voted down? This is a critical component. So then you need to fight that because the policy is not going to give you a road, which might mean there's less, traffic into your store, which means there's less sales. So, that's something where it's like a lot of times there's, the federal government, the state government, the local government, laws are full of unintended consequences. And so, like I said, I got elected, a lot of times because of my real estate knowledge. But lift stations are something I knew nothing about. There's a lot of people that might be experts in lift stations. They don't know the ramifications of zoning policies or impact fees or a lot of things like that. So they're going to look to wherever they can for information. And so, as a business owner, especially if it's very important a lot of times when somebody's running that you build that relationship with that person. There's somebody in Rowlett when I was running that there's a threshold of if you give less than $50, we'll say you don't have to sign your name on that. And so I'm pretty sure he gave everybody like $49 just to say that so he could support everybody, but not be shown as being supportive of one particular candidate. But building relationships, going to these fundraisers while they're running for office, that means so much to a candidate because once they get in office, everybody wants a piece of you, and you're kind of like, well, where were you when I was begging for money in that runoff, And so it is important to kind of get up front because, again, these unintended consequences might be something that directly cuts your business. And if you don't have a seat at the table, it's going to be really hard for you to feed your family.
Yeah. So do you see yourself serving in another appointment role or maybe in some other elected role in the future? Is that something? I'm not asking you to declare candidacy or anything, but what do you think might be a future goal for you in this area?
I think right now the goal, it's sometimes whenever if you take your eyes off your core business, a lot of times that's where you don't see as much success as you would otherwise. And
Mm.
I think right now I've really, whether it was, kind of teaching, or whether it was serving, or whether it was being on the city council, or, sometimes you really need to go back to focusing on, what's feeding your family now. Later on in my life, I have a love for foreign policy. I do a lot to, I brought a lot of people to Lubbock and Dallas, and I love thinking kind of a new way towards how the U.S. has responded to their foreign policy challenges, and I think that's what really interests me down the road,
Cool.
but that would be something. But, I think it'd be a few years till I did something like that. So, I mean, I'm a proud member of the Carlton Club in London, and we go to London every year, and that has been something that's really opened my eyes to 100 different areas. When somebody asks me about interest rates, I'm looking at it from a worldwide perspective. There's been 3 prime ministers the last 3 years in Portugal. Germany had a hard time finding a government. France had a hard time finding a government. So it's just been interesting to kind of understand all those issues, and then really understanding why the U.S. Has such a great, U.S. Treasury system or bond system, and why they call the 10-year Treasury really the risk-free rate.
So can you tell us a little bit about what the Carlton Group is? Because I'm sorry, you lost me on it.
Well, it's the Carlton Club. So
Carlton Club.
I
Sorry.
started doing a study abroad to London about 3 years ago, and it was
Okay.
just more of a, my whole, my dad passed away, and so I wanted to give everything I could to, to help the, Texas Tech prosper. And so one of the things I was like, man, it's like, let me do this. I'd never been to London before, had no knowledge of anything in London before, but I was like, man, I'll figure it out, And so I'm a member of the Dallas Petroleum Club, and through that we get reciprocals, and one was the Carlton Club. And so I went there, and immediately just became, it was just like an instantaneous relationship. So now it's up to about 10 or 11 Brits that are incredible leaders in 100 different areas, whether it's insurance, or whether it's tech, or whether it's nuclear engineering, or whether everything in between. It's just the club itself is the headquarters of the Conservative Party of Britain. And so through that, it's really a discussion club. You would call it a social club. And what's funny is the thing that I've changed the most by being a member there is I've really downgraded the amount of sports I consume. And when I go there, none of them care about any sports teams. None of them care about, they don't have a football team, or they don't have any rugby team. They're just like, no, all they do is they spend their time talking about General Wellington or Admiral Nelson, how they put it to Napoleon twice. It's like, that's like what matters to them. And you kind of like, you kind of like respect that, it's like, I love talking about, like, right now, it's like Germany has 2 conservative groups. They have the ADF, and then they have the CDU. And it's kind of like, going back and forth now, as far as, there's, what are the differences? What are the pros and the cons? And obviously there's just some big ticket issues that do affect America, because, now you're starting to see, tariffs, and you're starting to see how that affects Europe. But, there's so much of that you relay back to here, and it really makes you more well-rounded as an advisor.
Love it. There's so much in that. I wish we had time. We could unpack a lot more.
I know, and he's got plentiful stories of just the characters and the different politicians that he ran into at the Carlton Club. One last thing I told you I wanted to touch on this, and you mentioned it a little bit, were interest rates. That's no one has a crystal ball, but that's something that really impacts business owners, commercial real estate, all the above. Where do you see that going in the next 12 months?
So it's pretty interesting this week. So, obviously there's different voices within the Fed. And so you had, one voice of the Fed, President Waller, came out and said that he expected there to be a 25 BIP interest rate this year. You had somebody from, president of the San Francisco Fed said that she expected 2 rate cuts this year. I think the way you analyze this is, so September 18th is a good example. So September 18th, Powell came on, and this was before the election, and Powell reduced interest rates by 50 bips. So that affected short-term rates, but that had nothing to do with the treasury rates, and the bond market responded. And so you have two interplays. You have short-term rates and long-term rates. And so the Fed might be able to control prime and Fed borrowing rates, but they really can't control 10 and 30-year rates, which affect most of the homeowners and long-term commercial real estate owners. And so in September 18th, you saw quickly the bond market said, well, I heavily disagree with this rate reduction, so we're going to increase rates. And it went in the polar opposite direction. So there's two things moving. There's the Fed and there's the bond market. So, if, looking back, England had a prime minister not too long ago named Liz, goodness gracious, escapes me, Liz Truss. So Liz Truss was elected to basically be the next Ronald Reagan. She came on a conservative policy and she wanted to change things fast. And so she's notorious for the fact that a head of lettuce lasted longer than her governorship. And a big reason why is she moved so fast, gave no respect to the bond markets. The bond markets fly up and there's a revolt in England. She gets kicked out specifically for that. So a lot of people, when they're talking about rates, the focus is so much on Powell. But there's a whole market out there that Powell really has no power over, that really affects long-term rates. And so that's a lot on long versus short. So focusing on the Treasury, the 10-year Treasury rates. So, the 10-year Treasury is focused on getting people to buy government bonds. And so it's priced accordingly. So typically the rule is in a recession, rates come down because there's so many people fleeing into safety that they're going to buy, the treasury bonds here in the United States, because that's where they want to do it. And that's all over the world, China, Japan, countries all over the world will flee to us. And so we can reduce the price it charged. When things are good, when the economy is blowing and going, rates go typically higher because they have to place a price premium on those bonds, because when the economy is good, you're more likely to invest in a lot of different areas. You're not necessarily focused on safety because you have a lot of confidence on the economy. So you're going to be more focused on how to, the Fed's going to be more focused on how do I attract people when there's hundreds of other investment opportunities for people to get in. So they typically raise it. Now, inflation is the key factor. So if inflation goes up, then a lot of times rates go up because people have to be compensated for the reduction in their dollar. Your dollar's worth less if inflation continues to go up. So typically rates go up because of that. So a lot of dynamics kind of go into kind of determining long-term rates. And so, it's interesting, Powell came out and said that, tariffs were a big reason why he wasn't comfortable with rates. But what we're starting to see a potential of is money flowing in from tariffs that was greater than anticipated. And when the CBO modeled that, they didn't model, wow, is there going to be an influx that we didn't expect without a lot of hit to the consumer? And so that's kind of what they're monitoring right now. And so that might be something that really changes the ballgame in a lot of ways, and then you look at Europe, and Europe has already gone down, 100 basis points in their rates, so a lot of different groups around the world have lowered, and the U.S. has really stayed put. So, at some point you really think we have to move. And so, you hope that there's enough momentum to kind of definitely Q3, Q4, you start to see a little bit momentum down.
Okay. I'm putting you on the spot. 10-year treasuries, 4.42, something like that today. 12 months from now, where's it at?
12 months from now?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk through that. So 12 months from now, so what do we have in the hopper? So 12 months from now, so that would be July of 26. So we're right in the hunt of the election. So, the question is, how's the market going to respond depending on what party wins the House? There's a lot of thought right now that the Republicans are dead to rights on the House, that, Democrats are going to, pick up seats, get the majority. And so then, the last 2 years of the Trump presidency is going to be focused on dealing with investigation after investigation. And another thing, though, is that markets typically like divided government because that means that for the most part, there's going to be stability for the next 2 years and a lot of laws won't be passed. And so that might be something that looks good at it. If I, kind of thinking about all those factors, and then you kind of start to think about, okay, so is the economy going to be good? Where are jobs? What's coming down the pipe from that aspect? There's an interesting article today that China, has tried to move away in the Wall Street Journal. China has moved away from fossil fuels. They're really trying to push the EVs, and so they're going to be at peak oil demand at 2027. So, what does that do to the oil and gas industry? Does that mean obviously gas prices stay low for that for foreseeable future? So that's going to add a component to it because that means that goes into inflation. On the apartment side, you're going to see the cost of housing most likely increase because there's been less product on the ground. So now that there's less development on the ground, rents could potentially go up. So if rents go up, the cost of housing. And then you kind of start to think about what else goes into the CPI index that could cause inflation to maybe rise again above the 2.7 it is today. So kind of taking in all those factors and then kind of thinking in the general census of, is the economy most likely to be better or worse than we are today? Thinking about, my big deal is that kind of what I was talking about is, just with, the German economy just really hurting and being punished for their lack of manufacturing right now. You think of other major economies in Western Europe that are really suffering. You're starting to see, groups like AstraZeneca make, claims that they're going to build a plant in the US for 50 billion. So now you're starting to see, more investment potentially coming over, which could lead to maybe more jobs. And, you start to see a little bit robust economy. At this point, it's hard to say that, you don't see interest rates go down, by next year, it's at least going to be 50. I would say it's probably going to be about 50 bips lower than it is today. And so I hope it's better.
3.9. I'll take it.
I hope it's better than that, but I would probably say that in my analysis is where I think it most likely be.
Wow.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. I am fascinated by how all the different levers and aspects of our economy interact with each other locally, statewide, nationwide, globally. I love those conversations.
Well, and I can see how Carl doesn't have time to follow a sports team if he's if he's keeping all of that in his brain. So that was pretty impressive. I enjoyed that a lot. I think we're up to our time. Let's get into our fire round.
Let's do it.
All right, Carl, can you tell us what's your favorite movie?
Casablanca. Easy.
Okay.
You played it for her. You can play it for me. Play it again, Sam. There's 100 lines. I'm shocked. There's gambling in their casino. Oh, here's your winnings, sir. Thank you. I'm shocked. There's not a movie that has as many memorable lines as Casablanca. It's like I could watch that like endlessly on a loop. Like it's a beautiful movie.
Oh, classic choice. I like it.
I have never watched Casablanca.
That's all right.
Okay.
Now you've got your homework.
I've got my homework. All right. Aside from the Bible, what's your favorite book?
The Alchemist.
Oh,
so Paulo Coelho,
yeah.
and it's a book where it's kind of it's kind of sometimes it is. I remember, when you first decide that you're going to start a business, it's like it's tough. I remember one of the funny decisions was like, all right, what's your title? And and you're always like, well, somebody always gives you a title. Well, you're that somebody, so you're like, oh, huh, and it's there's so many decisions you have to make. But one of the things is you hope that if you have a good product and you work hard. People trust you, that you're going to see a lot of business, that people are going to want you to succeed. And the whole book is about forces bigger than you rooting for you to succeed. So The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho.
That's a very good one. I haven't thought about that book in a while, but it's on my shelf and I've read it. So I'm proud to say that. I can't always say that with our guests.
Well, if I had to do a second, The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. Like anything Hemingway, I think like if The Old Man and the Sea, it's something that if you're, fighting a challenge, there's just nothing like somebody that's like fighting a whale or a shark overnight. Just like, it's just empowering. Like Ernest Hemingway had an ability to see this world in a way where he captured every detail, in that book, you feel like, it's in Spain and you can kind of understand there's like the rumblings of the tables around you and the conversations. And he just had an amazing ability to capture. So, anything Hemingway as well.
That's awesome. What's one piece of advice that's common in your industry that you don't necessarily agree with?
The past is prologue. in a lot of ways, I think that there's a you always wonder, there's a saying that there's nothing new under the sun. And that's true in a lot of regards. But I think that there are monumental changes that happen in the world regarding economics and business that, like, no, things are really changing. World War One, I think, saw a lot of money flow from Western Europe, including London, into New York. And since then, New York has been the center of worldwide, finance, and that's still from World War One. So that completely changed it. You think about the New York stock market today versus the London stock market, and it's night and day because of that incident. I think our generation and the generations under us, it's going to be interesting to see how AI deals with that. How's that going to handle entry level jobs? How's that going to handle a lot of typical white collar businesses as well? So there are just monumental things that really do change the trajectory of business as we know it.
Hmm.
All right. How can we send people your way? Who do we need to send them to? What email, website, whatever? How can people get in touch with you to do business with you?
Yeah, easy. It's Carl@blackacrecommercial.com.
Perfect. All right. We'll send them that way. That will be in the show notes. Man, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
All right. If you enjoyed that episode, go ahead and click subscribe and keep coming back because there's more where that came from. We appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one.